Daniel, one of the conversations that we had, we were talking about what it is to be able to sense patterns incoming from the future. And you said those patterns from the future are unprecedented. You'll be often surprised when you see some incoming patterns from the future. And I think we're used to differentiating from our past patterns. I think one of the two most important leadership skills in the world today is recognizing unprecedented patterns.
As a skill that isn't talked about a lot, maybe never heard of, the ability to distinguish my bias, the bias of saying that the future is created by the past from my history, from our collective history. We can sense certain patterns and alignments, and we will tend to look for those. So the new skill that isn't often talked about, a skill for the 21st century, is to be able to recognize incoming unprecedented patterns, not based on anything from our past, because the world is changing. Quite frequently, the incoming pattern has no reference to anything we've seen before. So what's the skill of being able to recognize that incoming from the future, and in a way the ripples of that before it's actually shown up in the landscape?
Yeah, I think interesting example of that happened a few years back with Netflix and Blockbuster. Netflix developed a business model in which they mailed you DVDs. When Blockbuster, you had to go pick them up. And then Netflix was the first one to move into streaming of movies and television shows that then didn't have you depend on going to a network at a certain time, but you could stream at any time from your own home. And you could say that Netflix started streaming, but in a more manual sort of way by sending you the DVDs in the mail. And why it's important to business is Blockbuster completely missed it. And they had an opportunity to buy Netflix and rejected it because they didn't think it was a viable business model. They could have bought Netflix for $50 million at the time. Now Netflix is estimated to be worth about $167 billion, and Blockbuster went out of business. And so there's something here about unprecedented patterns and being able to recognize that as a leader in business these days.
I think one of the significant parts is that is when Netflix was mailing out the disc, the DVD or the Blu-ray. This was before streaming had really become prevalent. I'm not sure about the exact history. Maybe it was before it was even available. They were sensing it as an incoming thing, that fluidity of a different way of, let's say, streaming information. So their mailing of disc was a kind of precognitive sensing of an incoming wave of people needing it to be more fluent and picking up on that and using the best of what was available at the time. So they were already primed for streaming when streaming happened, and were able to very quickly move into basing their business on streaming. And then there was the next level of them actually not just streaming the content and creating the content. And they were the leaders in that too. They started that. They were at the front of the wave of saying, okay, we're streaming information. How about we actually create the content that we're streaming so we have more control of that?
And then the others followed suit. The skill that we're talking about in terms of recognizing the incoming wave, recognizing the chunks of information that come in that have you recognize the pattern that's unprecedented, could actually be the very thing that puts you ahead of the curve by cultivating that particular skill. It does, however, mean letting go of old thinking or coming from the past to determine what you're seeing. What are you seeing about that?
Well, I would say that that's part of another skill that we could call trans-contextual awareness. That idea of, let's say, Netflix moving to creating their own content. They're saying, okay, we've got the streaming thing and we're using other people's content. We're sensing a larger context, expanding the range and the perimeters of their awareness to include more cross-discipline, cross-cultural, cross-functional, cross-domain looking and sensing. So their awareness was moving in the direction of transcontextual. And that's definitely a skill that isn't talked about a lot. That is maybe the 21st century skill that we're all being called to up level.
Could you say a little more about what transcontextual awareness is as a skill?
When we say cross-discipline, cross-cultural. So the context from which I make a decision could be the domain I'm working in, could be from a culture, could be from a certain function that we're addressing. So I'd say transcontextual means that certainly not just keeping it to one of those, and then additionally not just addressing one at a time in a serial process of moving from this context, this dimension, this domain, this function, this culture, which could be a social culture as well as an ethnic culture. Not just addressing one and then moving to the next, but including that all of them all at once because they are all integrated, especially in our connected world. So to say that transcontextual might say multiple audiences, in Netflix case, multiple interest in what might want to be streamed, and certainly multicultural. And so the transcontextual means I'm concluding all those contexts, not just in a linear sequential way, but as one unified whole in how I'm being aware of the environment and landscape that I'm making decisions within.
There's problems that we're encountering in the world these days that have often been called wicked problems, which isn't about it's a good or a bad or an evil problem. A wicked problem is something that is so complex that the optimal solution isn't immediately identified, that it actually takes something different and a different kind of skill set in order to work with and be present to and provide other innovative kinds of solutions to a wicked problem. So a wicked problem can be something like the temperature rise and climate change. It can be inequality. It can be many of the problems that really have no immediate solution. And we kind of like having problems we can build solutions to. This is a different thing, which is requiring different skills. How will we bring transcontextual awareness to the wicked problems as we're also cultivating unprecedented pattern recognition?
Well, I might say that for starters, just the acknowledgement of we're at a level of unprecedented challenge, which could be called wicked problems. And to say that in a world where the rapidity of change is unprecedented and the requirement is unprecedented and the patterns that reflect that are unprecedented, to recognize that and then say that as wicked problems, there is no simple answer. The different level of awareness then means that you embrace those wicked problems from transcontextual awareness to say that what's good about a problem that can't be solved, that can only be addressed because it's a moving target, so that your skill then as a 21st century skill, if it's not about creating a solution and that solution may be causing three other problems, the way to address a moving target is to say, given all the landscapes this problem is bringing together, what wants to happen? What's moving through and what wants to happen? So that as a level of complexity from transjective, transrational awareness, we can be present to that larger sense of, in this moment, what wants to happen and what's coming from the future, and how do we skillfully stay in conversation with that. So it's a staying in conversation with a wicked problem because there's not a solution. The advantage then, the gift to that is then as a skill, you're not creating three other problems with a solution that you tried to get to because you were trying to solve it. You're embracing it as an opportunity to expand what's possible.
Yes, so somewhat like Steve Jobs did when he came into Apple. Everybody knew in business Apple was going to go out of business. What Steve Jobs did when he came in is to bring in a different level of design awareness and actually step into a different way to embrace the kind of wicked problem that Apple was in and see some unprecedented patterns come in that enabled him to go across context, across domain. So all of the elements that were happening in 2007 about memory and the power of computing and multiple other things actually led to the creation of an iPhone. And Steve Ballmer at Microsoft said, for example, there's no way the iPhone is going to actually survive. Turns out it's been the thing that's driven Apple to the top of the pyramid in terms of smartphones. So you're pointing to some very powerful skills that if leaders cultivated them could help us all move in some powerful ways ahead of the curve.
Well, it reminds me of the piece of Sherlock Holmes, the BBC version of Sherlock wouldn't take a case unless it was a wicked problem case. unless it was a case that wasn't interesting because it wasn't a wicked problem, because it would be too simple to solve. And Sherlock distinguished himself at the time because, let's say, the cases he took on. So this, as a skill, 21st century skill, means that you're distinguishing your enterprise by embracing the wicked problems from a place of opportunity.
In this video, we explored two important yet non-obvious leadership skills: recognizing patterns emerging from the future, unprecedented, surprising, bring in something you wouldn't have thought. And the second skill, cultivating trans-rational, trans-contextual design awareness, enables you to embrace wicked problems and complexity without addressing the past. You may be wondering, how will this help me make the change I want to see in the world? Watch our next video. I want to change the world. How do you know if you're ready to act?